Okay, we are ready to proceed.
Okay. We just received a message, council, to get started. So let's call the case of Stevie Rogers versus Drew Mars. My name is Judge Werman. Scoring judges, please look to the two buttons on the lower left of your screen and remember to keep your audio and video off unless the bailiff tells you otherwise. You should also have your video set to hide all non-video participants. This means the only people on the screen right now should be the advocates and me. At this time, I'll ask the attorneys to please make their appearances.
Absolutely.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No problem, Your Honor. Good morning. My name is Sonali Mehta, and I'm joined by my co-counsel, Mr. Elias Nybart.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning.
Together, we represent the plaintiff in today's case, Ms. Stevie Rogers.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning.
Appearances from the defense.
Yes.
Good morning. My name is Josh Ng. I'm here with Ms. Sarah Shapiro.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning.
Together, we represent the defendant, Drew Mars.
Good morning, Mr. Mars.
Good morning, Your Honor. Apologies. I had an issue
I'm
with
sorry,
my video.
Mr. Mars.
Good morning, Your Honor.
All right. All right, counsel, we will now hear opening statements from each party. Everyone should make sure they are in speaker view. That button is in the upper right of your screen. Attorneys, please remember to mute your audio when the other attorney is speaking.
Your Honor, the plaintiff does have a few housekeeping matters, if you don't mind, before opening statements.
Sure.
First, we wanted to draw the court's attention to a pretrial order by Judge Page stating that exhibits 1 through 7 have already been pre-admitted into evidence. Next, Your Honor, we would like to ask your permission when entering evidence outside those exhibits 1 through 7, if we can go ahead and put them up on the screen constructively outside the eye shot of the jury until they've been moved into evidence so as to show them to the witness. I've spoken with defense counsel and they have no objection to this.
That's fine. That's fine.
Finally, Your Honor, we wanted to let the court know that there was previously a police investigation which found relevant facts to today's case. Unfortunately, here in Midlands, we're not able to subpoena police officers, but we will be calling a private investigator who worked with the police to the stand to testify about that investigation. Per that same pretrial order by Judge Page, this private investigator can testify to the contents of the police report, which is Exhibit 6, Your Honor.
That's our understanding, Your Honor.
Okay, very good. All right.
Nothing further from the plaintiff, Your Honor. We're ready for opening statements.
All right. Please proceed.
Your Honor,
Yeah,
we have some pretrial matters too, just housekeeping matters from the defense.
Go ahead.
We'd like to invoke Rule 615, which calls for the constructive sequestration of every witness, barring the party representative. Ms. Drew Mars will be here in court with us today.
And Your Honor, Ms. Stevie Rogers will be here in court as well, as we've stipulated to.
Okay, very well.
And with that, the defense is ready to go into opening statements.
Okay, very good. All right, let's proceed with plaintiff's opening.
May it please the court?
Yes, ma'am.
Desperation, drugs, deceit. On August 14th, 2018, the defendant, Drew Mars, a home nurse, stood next to Agatha Lee's bed. In one hand, she held a small purple pill, an arthritis medication that Agatha took every single night. In the other hand, she held an identical purple pill. But this one, it wasn't arthritis medication. It was a drug so dangerous to Agatha Lee that a single pill could stop her heart. The defendant switched the pills, knowing that her boss would take whatever her nurse gave her. By the next morning, Agatha Lee was dead, and the defendant was 20 million richer. See, members of the jury, when Agatha died, she left her fortune behind to the defendant. She had written a will which left her entire estate, her mansion, her famous book, and $20 million in cash to the defendant, Drew Mars. Members of the jury, here in Midlands, we have a law called the Slayer Statute. We don't allow anyone to kill another person and then profit off of their death. That's why Agatha Lee's family has brought this lawsuit, to make sure that the defendant doesn't walk away with Agatha Lee's estate. That means that it's our job to prove to you that it is more likely than not that the defendant, Drew Mars, intentionally killed Agatha Lee. We're going to meet that burden today by showing you three things. First, the defendant was desperate for Agatha's money. Second, the drugs the defendant used to kill Agatha. And third, the deceit the defendant used to cover her tracks. I want to take each of those one at a time, starting with that first one. You're going to learn today that the defendant was desperate for Agatha's money. See, the defendant had a sick sibling at home, and she needed Agatha's money in order to take care of her family. You'll learn the defendant decided to kill when it seemed like that money was slipping through her fingers. You're going to learn about a conversation that Agatha Lee had the day before she died, where she decided she wanted to leave her money to family and not to the defendant. I want you to pay attention when you hear how the defendant reacted to that conversation, how her face turned red and she clenched her fists, and how she said, "No way." She became desperate. Next, we're going to show you how the defendant drugged Agatha Lee. See, Agatha had a very severe allergy to an over-the-counter medication called chloroandramine. Well, as Agatha's nurse, the defendant was one of the only people who knew about that allergy. She was one of the only people in the world who knew chloroandramine pills looked identical to the arthritis medication Agatha took every single night. You're going to get to hear from Miss Stevie Rogers. That's Agatha's granddaughter. She'll tell you she had a conversation with the defendant about chloroandramine just weeks before Agatha died. She'll tell you how the defendant said, "Just one pill of chloroandramine, and Agatha would be dead." Finally, we're going to show you the deceit the defendant used to get away with this. See, when the police officers started asking questions about how and why Agatha died, the defendant knew they were onto her. So when her name was announced at the reading of Agatha's will, she lied. She stood up in front of Agatha's family and friends. She covered her mouth and she said, "I had no idea," over and over again. Members of the jury, today you're going to hear from Ms. Mary Bond, a private investigator who Agatha's family hired to look into Agatha's death. And Ms. Bond will tell you about an email she found the defendant wrote months before Agatha died. Months before the defendant said, "I had no idea." She said, "I get everything. The house, the money, everything." You see, members of the jury, over the course of today's trial, the defense is going to tell you this is one big misunderstanding. Agatha's family, well, they're suing because they want a cut of the money, but members of the jury, the evidence is going to show you a different story. The evidence is going to show the defendant's desperation for that money, the drugs she used to get it, and the deceit she used to cover her tracks. Desperation, drugs, deceit. At the end of today's trial, we're going to ask you to see through that deception. We're going to ask you to find Drew Mars liable. Thank you.
Defense counsel? Are you ready?
Yes, Your Honor. Just 1 second. Judge Werman, Ms. Mehta, members of the jury, may it please the court. It's all part of the plan. See, it's no coincidence that Agatha Lee died on August 14th. It's no coincidence that the plaintiff filed a claim against Ms. Mars before anyone knew how she died. And it's no coincidence when Ms. Mehta came up here and mentioned deception, drugs, and deceit. She didn't talk about someone else who had a reason to be desperate. Someone else who had access to the drugs that killed Miss Lee. And someone else who had a reason to deceive. And if that someone else is successful in today's trial, they stand to make over $20 million. See, all of this, Agatha Lee's trial, Miss Mars's trial, Agatha Lee's death, the reason you and I are in court, it's all part of one person's plan. It's all part of Stevie Rogers' plan. So I want to take a step back and give you a full picture of what happened. You see, this plan, it starts back in June of 2018. At the time, the plaintiff, she doesn't have a real job. She doesn't have a lot of money, but what she does have is a wealthy grandmother. A grandmother who has over $20 million in her will. So Miss Rogers, she moves in with her grandmother in an attempt to get back into her grandmother's good favor and her grandmother's will. The evidence will show that on August 14th, the plaintiff asks her grandmother to be part of that will. But her grandmother says no. She tells Miss Rogers that all the money, it's going to Drew Mars. And that's when Miss Rogers comes up with a new plan. A plan to get all of her grandmother's money and a plan to get rid of Drew Mars. The plan is simple. See, Miss Mars, she knows, Miss Rogers, she knows that her grandmother is deadly allergic to over-the-counter heartburn medicine. So she goes to the local pharmacy, she picks up a bottle of those pills, and she switches them with her grandmother's daily supplements. With the rest of the pills, she places them in Drew Mars's closet, and she leaves them there. The question is then why? Why would Stevie Rogers go to such lengths to frame Drew Mars? Well, members of the jury, Stevie Rogers was out of options. And there was only one way she was going to make any of her grandmother's money. And that's if Drew Mars is found liable in today's trial. And that's the real reason we're all in court today. It's all part of Stevie Rogers' plan. Now, as the defense, we don't have a burden of proof. No, that burden lies on the plaintiff's table and the plaintiff's table alone. They have to prove it's more likely than not that Drew Mars murdered Agatha Lee. Today, they won't be able to meet that burden because of three simple questions we'll ask you to remember as we walk you through the evidence. First, did Stevie Rogers have access to the pills that killed Miss Lee? Second, did Stevie Rogers have a reason to kill Miss Lee? And third, could Stevie Rogers have committed the crime? Let's walk through the evidence, starting with that first question. First, did Stevie Rogers have access to the pills that killed Miss Lee? Today, it is undisputed there are over 15 pharmacies close to Miss Lee's house where anyone could have walked in and purchased the pills that killed Miss Lee. Miss Rogers, she's going to admit herself. She knew about her grandmother's allergy and she had the opportunity to go in and purchase those pills. That brings us to the second question we're going to ask today. Did Stevie Rogers have a reason to kill Miss Lee? Because the evidence will show us the answer is yes. Because we're going to call someone to the stand today. We're going to call Agatha Lee's friend, a biographer who was working on a chapter about Miss Lee. He's going to tell you it was only after Miss Rogers was written out of a will that she decided to move in with her grandmother. And it was only after a tough conversation with Stevie Rogers that Agatha Lee was found dead. That brings us to our final question today. Could Stevie Rogers have committed the crime? See, Stevie Rogers, she's going to take the stand today. And as the defense, we're going to get a chance to ask her some questions. She'll be forced to admit that she knew when her grandmother wasn't in her room. She'll be forced to admit that she knew when her grandmother would take her daily supplements. And she'll be forced to admit that she had access to the location where the pills were found. These facts, they tell us that Stevie Rogers could have committed the crime without question. Members of the jury, as you look through all the evidence at the end of today's trial, you'll see it's all part of Stevie Rogers' plan to make over $20 million. But today, you have the power to stop that plan. You have the power to find the truth. That's why at the end of today's trial, my co-counsel, Ms. Sarah Shapiro, is going to come up before you. She's going to ask you to find the truth. She's going to ask you to find Ms. Mars not liable. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. All right, now before the first witness, plaintiff calls its first witness, I will ask everyone to switch to gallery view. That button is in the upper right of your screen. This will allow you to see the attorneys and witness at the same time. Okay? All right, is plaintiff ready to proceed with its first witness?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the plaintiff calls Stevie Rogers to the stand. May I proceed, Your Honor?
Yes. Yes, proceed.
Hi, Ms. Rogers. I'm going to be asking you some questions today. Before I start, can you see and hear me all right?
Yes, ma'am, I can.
Now, ma'am, could you start by introducing yourself to the members of the jury?
Hello, my name is Stevie Rogers.
Do you know somebody named Agatha Lee?
I do. Agatha was my grandmother.
Could you tell us a little bit about her?
She was a writer. Growing up, the best part of the week was always visiting Nana. She practically raised me. I really loved her.
Well, Ms. Rogers, could you tell us about the rest of your family?
Growing up, it was just me and my parents. We spent a lot of time in New Zealand for my dad's work, but back in 2008, we were in a car crash, and my parents passed away. I was 20 at the time.
How did your life change after your parents passed?
It was hard, really hard. I tried to keep going. I enrolled in law school, but eventually I had to drop out because I just wasn't keeping up. I lost touch with everyone, even Nana. At the time, I just wanted to forget about everything.
Did that change at any point?
At some point, I realized my parents wouldn't have wanted me to end up like this. So I started getting my life back on track. I went to rehab, reconnected with some important people. That was back in 2018.
Ms. Rogers, could you tell us about your financial situation in that year, 2018?
It wasn't great. I had access to a trust fund that my parents left me before they passed away. I had enough to get by, though.
Did you speak with your grandmother at any point in that year, 2018?
Yeah. At the beginning of the year, Nana sent me a letter telling me that she was taking me out of her will and that she was leaving everything to her caretaker, Drew Mars, instead. Honestly, I understood. I knew how bad I had messed up by not keeping in touch with her.
Ma'am, did you see your grandmother at any point after she sent you this letter?
I did. I went to go visit Nana at her house in Midlands after I got out of rehab. It was the 10th year anniversary passing of my parents, and I really wanted to be with family.
And what was your relationship with your grandmother like after you moved in with her?
Things were really good. We were spending tons of time together, playing games, telling stories. I was finally starting to feel like myself again.
Ms. Rogers, earlier you mentioned somebody named Drew Mars. How do you know who that person is?
Drew was my grandmother's caretaker. She lived with Nana.
Could you tell us about your relationship with the defendant, Drew?
If I'm being honest, we didn't really have one. We didn't talk much, but every week Drew was asking me how long I was planning to stay or when I thought I might leave.
Ms. Rogers, I want to go ahead and fast forward and talk about the day of August 14th. And I want to keep a timeline of what happened on that day. Mr. Nybart, could you put that on the screen for us? So, ma'am, could you tell us how that day, August 14th, started out?
Started out like normal. I made breakfast for my Nana like usual, and we spent the morning together in her study.
Ms. Rogers, did you happen to talk to your grandmother about her will on that morning?
Yes, ma'am. Nana told me that she felt like we had really connected and that she felt so grateful that I'd come back. She said that she was planning on changing her will back to leave everything to me instead of Drew.
Ma'am, what happened? What time was that? Excuse me.
It was right before we left for lunch, 11:30, I think.
What happened next?
We left the study and I practically ran into Drew. She was standing right outside the door.
Ms. Rogers, do you know if the defendant heard that conversation?
Objection, Your Honor. This question calls for speculation.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Yes.
The question I asked was whether or not Ms. Rogers knew that Drew heard this conversation. Now, if she doesn't know, she's free to tell the jury so, but it's our understanding that she had an interaction with Drew Mars immediately afterwards regarding this conversation, and that's what she's going to testify to. She won't tell us definitively whether or not she knows if she doesn't know.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Briefly.
Even if Ms. Rogers doesn't in fact know whether Drew Mars overheard this conversation, the question itself is asking Ms. Rogers to speculate as to the mindset of Drew Mars, and also to the fact that Drew Mars, who was outside of the room when this conversation took place, across a closed door, as to what she was doing at that time.
This question does require some speculation on the witness's part, so I'm going to sustain the objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
Please proceed.
Ms. Rogers, could you tell us what happened after you and your grandmother left the study?
I ran into Drew. She was standing right outside the door. Her fists were clenched and her face was all red. When she saw me, she looked at me and she said, "No way."
Ma'am, what happened after that?
Nana had a lunch meeting, and then we spent the rest of the day together. She went to bed after we finished a movie, 9:30, and I went downstairs.
Miss Rogers, did you see the defendant at any point after your grandmother went to bed?
Yeah. When I was walking downstairs, I saw her. She was going across from her bedroom across the hall to my Nana's room. It was right after I left her room. It was like 9:35 to 9:40.
Miss Rogers, could you see what she was doing with her hands?
I couldn't see exactly, but she held her hand with her palm up and her fingers curled like this.
And ma'am, what time was it that you saw the defendant with her hand up and her fingers curled walking towards your grandmother's room?
Between 9:35 and 9:40.
All right, Miss Rogers, I know this might be difficult, but I do need to ask you about what happened the next morning. Could you tell us what happened when you woke up?
I didn't realize anything was wrong at first. Drew woke me up at 8:30. She told me that my Nana wasn't moving.
And what did you do?
I ran to her room, but she was lying in her bed, but she wasn't moving. Her eyes were closed and she wasn't breathing. She didn't have a pulse.
What happened next?
I called 911. I keep looking at her, wondering, hoping that she would wake up, but nothing happened. I didn't understand how this could have happened. Just yesterday, we had been talking. I thought she was fine. I didn't understand.
Miss Rogers, did you call anybody else besides the police?
I called a private investigator. Something about the whole thing just seemed wrong to me. It shouldn't have happened. I wanted to make sure that we found out the truth.
Well, Miss Rogers, did the police ever tell you what your grandmother's cause of death was?
They told me that she had an allergic reaction to chloroangemine. It's a heartburn medication that Nana's really allergic to.
Did you ever speak to the defendant about chloroandramine?
Yeah. One night we were eating dinner together and she brought it up out of the blue. She said, "Your Nana is really allergic to chloroangemine. If she took even one pill, she'd be dead."
Mr. Nybart, could we zoom out and put that testimony on the timeline? Thank you, sir. You can take the timeline down now. So, ma'am, you mentioned earlier that your grandmother decided to leave her will money to you instead of to the defendant. Did she make that change before she died?
No, ma'am. She died the day after she told me she was going to put me in her will instead of Drew.
Ms. Rogers, thank you for your time today. Your Honor, I have nothing further at this time.
Okay, cross-examine. Defense counsel, you ready to cross?
Ms. Shapiro, your mic is off.
Thank you. I apologize.
Okay, you ready, ma'am?
Yes, may I proceed with cross-examination?
Yes.
Good morning, Ms. Rogers. I want to start off by talking about your grandmother's will.
Sure.
Your grandmother, she had $20 million in savings.
Yes, ma'am. That's right.
And according to her will from 2008, you would get all that money.
Yes, ma'am. That's right.
But that changed?
Yes, ma'am. After my parents passed away, I lost contact with Nana, and she took me out of the will.
And you know that because she wrote you a letter in February of that year.
Yes, ma'am. That's right.
Your Honor, permission to display what has been previously marked as Exhibit 10 constructively outside the view of the jury.
Permission granted.
Ms. Rogers, this is that letter that your grandmother wrote you,
Yes, ma'am. It looks like it, yes.
and it's an accurate copy.
Yes, ma'am.
At this time, the defense moves Exhibit 10 into evidence.
Objection, Your Honor, to hearsay. This is an out-of-court statement being used for the truth of the matter.
May I respond?
Yes.
Your Honor, I have two responses to the objection of hearsay. First, if we could take a look at that second to last paragraph. Mr. Eng, if you don't mind flipping to the next slide. This paragraph falls under an exception to hearsay under Rule 8033. It's a statement of a motive, intent, or plan. In this paragraph, Ms. Lee writes that she plans to write a new will and that she plans to leave everything in her inheritance to Drew Mars. With regard to the rest of the statements in this document, Mr. Eng, if you don't mind going back a slide. These statements are not hearsay, as they're not being offered for the truth of the matter asserted, but rather for their effect on the reader, Stevie Rogers. The statements contained therein discuss Agatha Lee's feelings and her beliefs about Stevie Rogers' relationship with her. Statements such as, "I promise to always take care of you, and I think I've done that. I've done you a grave disservice." None of those statements are being offered for their truth value, but rather for their effect on Stevie Rogers. It is the defense's contention that this letter in which Ms. Lee disinherited Ms. Rogers upset the plaintiff and was the motive for the plaintiff's decision to kill Agatha Lee.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Yes.
So first I want to talk about that paragraph that Ms. Shapiro just mentioned. Now, we've stipulated to two sentences in that paragraph. We've stipulated that Agatha Lee changed her will and left her money to Drew. However, Your Honor, there are other statements in that paragraph, such as Drew has been with me for more than a decade, stayed with me, those sorts of statements, which are being used for the truth of the matter and that we haven't stipulated to. Your Honor, as far as the rest of the letter, there are specific statements in this letter which the defense is absolutely using for the truth of the matter, such as, "My mind is made up about the will, and we've become family in name only. You only ever call me by asking for money." Your Honor, we know they're using those statements for the truth of the matter because since opening statements, they've put this relationship between Stevie Rogers and Agatha Lee at issue. It's their argument that Stevie Rogers and Agatha Lee's relationship was broken, and that's why Stevie Rogers killed Agatha Lee. They're certainly using those statements about their relationship for the truth of the matter.
Response, Your Honor?
Briefly.
Yes, Your Honor. With regard to Ms. Mehta's first point about those other statements about Drew Mars in that second to last paragraph, we're going to be calling Drew Mars to the stand today, and she's going to testify about her relationship with Agatha Lee and the truth value of that matter contained therein. Therefore, the fact that these statements are being offered in that paragraph is only going to Ms. Rogers' perception of their relationship, what she understood, and why she had a motive to frame Drew Mars for the murder. Your Honor, additionally, the statements that Ms. Mehta just referenced, the statement that Agatha Lee's mind was made up, and that's a statement that falls under 8033 as well. It's Ms. Lee's current then mental state and emotional state, her intentions. She intended to change the will, and her mind was made up. The other statements in this document are not being offered for the truth value, as we're going to be cross-examining Stevie Rogers on exactly what her financial situation is like. Therefore, these statements only go to show to the members of the jury what Stevie Rogers read and how that information impacted her motive for committing this crime.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Counsel, this letter is extremely damaging to one party in this case, and it is not subject to the standard cross-examination that we would see in most cases, especially in a situation where this letter is being offered, for a motive to get a motive across that somebody had a real incentive to make sure that Nana was not available to testify in this case. And so I'm going to sustain the objection. I think it's appropriate.
Your Honor, may I just clarify? With regard to the statements that fall under 8033, are those statements admitted?
No.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yeah.
Ms.
The reason I'm saying that, counsel, is because if I admit a portion of that letter, I'm not doing justice to the rest of the content of that letter. And I'm not, now, I don't want to misunderstand what you said to me. What has been stipulated as to the will and the death of Nana, that's okay, that can come in.
That's our understanding as well, Your Honor. We've stipulated about the 2008 will was for Stevie, the 2018 will was for Drew Mars. We have no objection to that content.
Okay, all right.
Yes, Your Honor. So, Ms. Rogers, you did tell Ms. Mehta on direct examination that you knew your grandmother changed her will to leave everything to Drew Mars, right? That's what you said earlier?
Yes, ma'am, that's right.
And you knew that in February of 2018.
Yes, ma'am. That's when Nana sent the letter.
Now, at that time, you still had your trust fund.
Yes, ma'am, I did.
Now, I'd like to get a timeline of everything that happened around that point. Mr. Ng, could you please pull up that timeline? Mr. Ng, please. So in June of 2018, your trust fund ran out.
Yes, ma'am, that's right.
And Ms. Rogers, you've never had a real job.
No, ma'am, that's not true.
Ms. Rogers, is it your testimony that you've had a real job, a regular job?
Yes, ma'am, I've had a real job. I'm a writer. I'm working on getting my first book published right now.
Ms. Rogers, you remember when we deposed you in July, just 3 weeks ago?
Yes, ma'am, I do.
And we asked you whether you had a regular job.
Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry. Your question was if I had a real job. Of course I have. I'm a writer.
So to be clear, you've never had a regular job.
No, ma'am. I'm a writer on and off.
Ms. Rogers, this is a transcript of that deposition, right?
Yes, ma'am. That's right.
It's a fair and accurate copy?
Yes, ma'am. That's right.
Directing you to lines 24 through 28. Question. What do you mean? Excuse me, lines 22 through 28, excuse me. Can you summarize your work experience?
Sorry, I'm sorry, ma'am. Do you mind giving me a second?
Of course, it's on the screen for you. It's right there.
Okay, I have it. Thank you.
Question. Can you summarize your work experience? What do you mean? I mean, please list all of the jobs you've held. I've never had a regular job. Question. What have you done for money? How did you make ends meet? My parents left me a trust fund. I gained control of it when I turned 21, less than a month after their deaths. Did I read that correctly?
Yes, ma'am, you did. You missed a portion. It's a bit lower. It's titled line 33. I say that I've started 2 novels. That's right. I'm a writer on and off.
All right, Mr. Ng, you can take that deposition down. But to be clear, Ms. Rogers, when we asked you what you did for money, you didn't mention those novels.
No, ma'am. When they asked if I had a regular job, I said I hadn't. I'm a writer on and off. That's my real job.
And when we asked you about your work experience, you said you'd never had a regular job.
No, ma'am. Again, I'm a writer. I'm working on 2 novels.
Sure, Ms. Rogers. So I want to move on to after June of 2018 when your trust fund ran out. You moved in with your grandmother just a month later?
Yes, ma'am. I had just gotten out of rehab and I went to go see her. She was the only family that I had left.
And your grandmother, you didn't see her regularly at that time?
No, ma'am. After my parents died, I lost contact with a lot of my family. But by 2018, I was ready to get my life back in order. That's when I went to go see her.
To be clear, you hadn't seen her since 2011.
No, ma'am, that's right.
Now, as soon as your trust fund ran out, that very same month, 7 years after you hadn't seen your grandmother, you hired a private investigator to find her.
Yes, ma'am. Since we had fallen out of touch, I didn't know where she had moved. I didn't know where she was, so I tried to find her.
All right, I want to move on to August 15th, 2018. At 8:35 that morning, Drew Mars told you your grandmother wasn't waking up.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am, it was that morning that Drew woke me up and said that she wasn't moving.
So you called 911.
Yes, ma'am. I called 911 for my Nana.
Ms. Rogers, your 82-year-old grandmother passed away in her bed. And the first thing you told 911 was that she had been murdered.
Yes, ma'am. The whole thing, it didn't make sense to me. My Nana was fit and she was healthy, but she wasn't waking up. I didn't understand.
Let's talk about what you knew when you called 911. Ms. Rogers, you knew what had caused your grandmother's death.
No, ma'am, I didn't. I had no idea.
You knew that your grandmother had a fatal allergy to a drug sold over the counter called chloroandramine.
Yes, ma'am. Drew told me that Nana was allergic to chloroandramine and so that it could never be in the house.
And when the police and your private investigator showed up at your house that day, you told them to order a toxicology screen.
Yes, ma'am. At first, the police keep saying that Nana died because she was old, but that didn't seem right to me. I asked them to run all of the tests on her body that they could.
And that's right. Even though the police thought that your grandmother had died of old age, you insisted that they order that tox screen.
Yes, ma'am. I said that they should run all of the tests that they could because my Nana, she was healthy.
Ms. Rogers, when did you file this lawsuit?
It was a few days after my grandmother's death, August 20th. Something about the whole thing didn't seem right to me. I thought that Drew had done something to kill my grandmother, so I told the lawyers and we filed this lawsuit. Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Rogers, when did that autopsy with the toxicology screen come back?
I believe it was August 21st.
So, Ms. Rogers, you filed this lawsuit before, excuse me, but you filed this lawsuit before that tox screen came back.
That's right, ma'am. When we first filed the lawsuit, I just said that Drew had done something to kill my grandmother, and we didn't know anything about the chloroandramine yet. When the test results came back, I showed them to my lawyers, and they changed the lawsuit.
Ms. Rogers, you actually filed this lawsuit before that tox screen came back because you already knew what it would show.
Yes, ma'am. I knew that it would show that my Nana was murdered. She didn't die in her sleep.
Let's talk about why you did that. Ms. Rogers, before August 14th, you knew about something called the Slayer statute?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
And you knew that under that statute, if Drew Mars was found responsible for Agatha Lee's death, she wouldn't be able to inherit the $20 million in her estate.
Yes, ma'am. I know that if you kill someone, you shouldn't get to inherit their money.
Ms. Rogers, if Drew Mars didn't get that $20 million, You would.
Yes, ma'am. That's what my lawyers explained to me, yes.
Thank you, Ms. Rogers. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
No redirect examination, Your Honor.
So plaintiff rest?
No, Your Honor, the plaintiff has one more witness to call today.
Okay.
Your Honor, this time the plaintiff calls M. Bond to the stand.
Mr. Bond? You can proceed, counsel, if he's ready.
Yes, Your Honor. Can you state your name for the court?
Good morning. I'm Mary Bond.
Ms. Bond, what do you do for a living?
I'm a licensed private investigator here in Midlands.
What do you do as a private investigator?
Essentially, people hire me to conduct additional investigation alongside the police. So I investigate crime scenes and collect evidence, interview witnesses, and I try to answer questions that the police might not be able to.
Well, ma'am, how are you involved in today's case?
Stevie Rogers hired me to look into the death of her grandmother, Agatha Lee. So I worked alongside the Midlands PD in their investigation.
Well, how did that investigation begin?
Miss Rogers called me the morning that her grandmother died, so I went straight to the Lee Manor. I headed up to Agatha's bedroom, where I found Stevie Rogers, Drew Mars, and, of course, Miss Lee's body.
Now, ma'am, when you found Miss Lee's body, what did you and police investigators do?
The first thing we did from there was try to figure out the cause of Miss Lee's death. And here that was a bit difficult because there were no visible wounds or bruising.
Well, did you ever find out Miss Lee's cause of death?
Yes, the coroner eventually conducted an autopsy, which I had access to, that confirmed the cause of Miss Lee's death.
Would you recognize that autopsy in court today?
Yes, I'm sure I would.
Miss Manning, can we see that autopsy, please? Now, Miss Bond, what are we looking at here?
This is that autopsy report.
Now, according to this autopsy, what was Miss Lee's cause of death?
As you can see, the coroner found that Agatha died due to a fatal allergic reaction to a drug called chloroandramine.
Well, ma'am, can you tell the members of the jury what's chloroandramine?
Sure, it's a very common heartburn pill. It's available at most pharmacies. I've taken it a few times myself. But according to the autopsy, Miss Lee was extremely allergic to the drug.
Well, ma'am, if Miss Lee was allergic to chloroandramine, I want to talk about how that could have ended up in her body. How did you go about investigating that question?
Right. So when I examined Miss Lee's medicine chest, I found that Miss Lee's daily arthritis medication was exactly the same size, shape, and color as chloroandramine. So from there, the police and I began to investigate whether or not somebody could have swapped the two pills.
Ma'am, at that point in your investigation, did you have any suspects?
Yes, I did. Now, there were no signs of forced entry to the house, so no broken windows or picked locks. So my two suspects were the two people who told me that they were in the Lee Manor the night that Miss Lee died. So that was Stevie Rogers and Drew Mars.
Ms. Bond, I want to talk about those people one by one, starting with the defendant. Can you tell the members of the jury, who is Drew Mars?
Of course, Drew Mars told me that she was Miss Lee's full-time nurse.
Now, why did you believe the defendant was a suspect for today's case?
There were two reasons. First of all, I found that the defendant had access to Miss Lee's medications. In fact, she told me that she was responsible for administering medicine. Second, I found that the defendant had the means and the opportunity to access chloroandramine the day that Miss Lee died.
Well, how exactly could the defendant access chloroandramine?
Like I said, it's available over the counter. And I did find that the defendant admitted to the police that she went to a pharmacy the day that Miss Lee died, alone, and she couldn't provide an explanation or a receipt for her visit.
Now, ma'am, you just told us the defendant had access to chlorandramine. Did he find any evidence that she was in possession of chlorandramine?
Yes, we found a bag of chlorandramine pills in the defendant's closet.
During your investigation, did the police take pictures of that bag?
Yes, they took photographs of the bag and where it was found in the Lee Manor.
Would you recognize those pictures in court today?
Yes, I would.
Ms. Mehta, can we see exhibits 14, 15, and 17, please? Now, investigator, what are we looking at here?
These are the photographs that we took in the Lee Manor.
Are they fair and accurate copies of those photographs?
Yes, they look like it.
Have they been changed or altered in any way?
No, they look the same as the last time I saw them.
Your Honor, at this time, the plaintiff moves exhibits 14, 15, and 17 into evidence.
Your Honor, I believe you're muted.
All right, let them be received then.
We have no objections, Your Honor.
Okay.
Now, investigator, you mentioned the bag was found in the defendant's room. Where exactly in Drew Mars's room did you find that bag?
So we found the bag in the defendant's closet, and as you can see, it was tucked away under that grey blanket. Yes.
Now, ma'am, did you find any evidence that the defendant touched that bag that had the pills in it?
Well, after finding the bag in the defendant's room, we of course tested it for fingerprints, and we found a partial print on the bag zipper that did belong to the defendant.
Now, Ms. Bond, before you told us that you considered Stevie Rogers as a suspect as well, did you find
Yes.
Stevie Rogers' fingerprints on that bag?
No, we didn't.
Now, Ms. Bond, in trial today, the defense is alleging that Stevie Rogers planted that bag in the defendant's closet. Did you find Stevie Rogers' fingerprints in the defendant's room?
No, we didn't find Stevie Rogers' fingerprints in the defendant's room.
Did you find Stevie Rogers' fingerprints in the closet where the chlorandramine was found?
No, we didn't.
All right, Ms. Bond, I want to shift focus and talk about how Drew Mars reacted after Agatha Lee died. Ms. Mehta, can we see that timeline again, please? Now, Ms. Bond, did you find any evidence that the defendant would benefit if Miss Lee ever died?
Yes, actually. I was present at the will reading where it was revealed that Miss Lee had left her entire estate to Miss Mars.
Now, how did the defendant react to hearing that information?
Well, she stood up, she gasped, and she covered her mouth with her hands. She said, "I cannot believe it. I had no idea." And then she left the room.
Well, Ms. Bond, when did that will reading take place?
The will reading was August 20th, 2018.
Now, ma'am, did you find any evidence that the defendant knew about the inheritance before that will reading on August 20th of 2018?
Yes, I did. I conducted a search of the defendant's computer where I found an email which suggested that the defendant knew about the changes to Miss Lee's will before the will reading.
Would you recognize that email in court today?
Yes, I would.
Ms. Mehta, can we see that email, please? Now, Ms. Bond, what are we looking at here?
This is the email that I was just talking about.
Is it fair and accurate?
Yes, looks like it.
Has it been changed or altered in any way?
No, it hasn't.
Your Honor, at this time, the plaintiff moves Exhibit 13 into evidence.
Any objection?
Without objection, Your Honor.
Let it be received.
Now, Ms. Bond, you just said this email suggested to you that the defendant knew about the will before the will reading. Well, what exactly does this email say?
It says, "Agatha just told me she changed her will to leave everything to me. I get everything, the house, the money, everything. We're talking millions of dollars. This is going to totally change my life."
And Ms. Bond, do you know when this email was sent?
Yes, it's dated February 1st, 2018. That's 6 months before the defendant said that she had no idea.
Thank you, Ms. Bond. We have no further questions at this time, Your Honor. Ms. Mehta, you can take the timeline down.
All right, cross-examine.
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
Yes.
Ms. Bond, I want to talk about how you're involved in today's case, okay?
All right, go ahead.
You were contacted back in June of 2018 by the plaintiff, right?
Yes, at that time, Stevie Rogers wanted me to locate her grandmother, Agatha Lee.
She paid you $10,000 to locate that grandmother, right?
Yes, that's correct.
For 2 months, you didn't speak with Miss Rogers, right?
No, the next time that I heard from her was August 15th.
And on August 15th, Miss Rogers, she retained you to investigate what had happened to her grandmother, true?
Yes, that's correct.
And to do that job, ma'am, she promised to pay you $25,000, right?
Yes, of course. I'm a private investigator. I am paid for my work. My clients don't always like what I find, but that's my job.
To be clear, ma'am, Miss Rogers, she still hasn't paid you yet.
Yes, that's true.
And like you mentioned on direct examination, you had several theories about what happened to her grandmother, right?
Yes, I had some suspects.
One of your theories was that Stevie Rogers could have killed her grandmother.
Yes, I thought that was possible. Again, there were only 2 people in the Lee manor the night that Miss Lee died. That was Stevie Rogers and the defendant Drew Mars.
Ma'am, I want to talk about why you considered Stevie Rogers a suspect. Because on August 15th, you received a phone call at around 8:45 from Miss Rogers, right?
Yes, that was when Miss Rogers called me and informed me what had happened.
The plaintiff, she calls you and she says, "My grandmother has been murdered."
Yes, that's what she said.
Ma'am, she doesn't say my grandmother is dead, does she?
No, she said Nana's been murdered.
So you go to her bedroom, Miss Lee's bedroom, a little under an hour later, right?
Yes, I got to the Lee Manor at about 9:25, and I went straight to Miss Lee's bedroom.
When you were at her bedroom, you saw her body, right?
Yes, she was laying in bed and covered by a sheet. She was motionless.
Ma'am, at that time, it doesn't look like a murder has happened, right?
No, like I said, there were no wounds or bruising, so it was a little bit trickier to figure out the cause of Miss Lee's death.
Ma'am, it was your initial opinion that it looked like she died of natural causes, right?
Yes, it looked like that, but looks can often be deceiving.
Right. Miss Bond, you and I can agree that today we know that Agatha Lee died as a result of ingesting 2 chloroandramine pills, right?
Yes, exactly.
But at the time, a toxicology report hadn't been done.
No, at that time, there had not been a toxicology screen.
But it was an hour ago when the plaintiff called you and said that her grandmother had been murdered.
Yes, and she was extremely worried about her grandmother.
So, ma'am, I want to talk about something you mentioned on direct examination about fingerprints. You said one fingerprint was found on the black bag, right? The black bag inside Miss Mars's closet?
Yes, correct. We found one partial print on the bag zipper.
Ms. Shapiro, could you pull up what has been entered as Exhibit 15 for the members of the jury? Ma'am, this is that bag, right?
Yes, correct. That's it. You can see the zipper in the bottom left corner.
Ma'am, it's inside this bag that you found a bottle of chloroandramine pills, right?
Yes, that's exactly right.
Ma'am, on that bottle of chloroandramine pills, you didn't find a single fingerprint that belonged to Drew Mars?
No, there were no usable prints.
Ma'am, you found some smudges, right?
Yes, exactly.
Ma'am, you can't tell us whether those smudges belong to Drew Mars or Stevie Rogers, can you?
No, I can't, and that's one limit of fingerprinting.
Ma'am, you also mentioned on direct examinations that you didn't find a single fingerprint of Stevie Rogers in Drew Mars's room. That's what you said?
Yes.
But ma'am, isn't it true that they didn't do a fingerprint analysis on Drew Mars's room?
Well, the police searched Stevie Rogers' room.
Ma'am, is it your testimony that they searched her room for fingerprints?
No, I'm not sure if they searched for fingerprints.
So ma'am, I want to talk about the fingerprint that was found on this black bag, because you
Of
can't put a
course.
timestamp on when that fingerprint was placed on this bag, right?
No, that's another limit of fingerprinting.
So you can't tell us whether it was gotten after August 15th when Agatha Lee was found dead?
No, I can't tell you that for certain.
Ma'am, you can't tell us how this fingerprint was placed on that bag, can it? Can you?
You mean how the person put their finger on it?
Yes, ma'am.
No.
What you can tell us is, like on direct examination, you found this bag inside a closet, right? Drew Mars's closet?
Yes, correct. And we found it in Drew Mars' closet.
Ms. Shapiro, could you pull up Exhibit 14 for the members of the jury? And could you go to the next slide? Ma'am, circled within this red circle, that points to the black bag where you found it, right?
Yes, correct.
That black bag it's on top of some things, right?
Yes, it appears to be on top of some blankets.
Ma'am, you can't tell us whether Drew Mars touched that black bag to try to get some of the things underneath?
No, I couldn't tell you that. All I can tell you is that Drew Mars' fingerprint was the only print that we found on the bag.
Well, I want to circle back to that print because if Ms. Shapiro, could you please pull up Exhibit 15? Thank you. That print was found on the zipper, like you mentioned, on the bottom left corner, right?
Yes, that circle is correct. That's where we found the print.
A single identifiable fingerprint was found on that bag.
Yes, so we only found one readable, usable print.
Like you mentioned, ma'am, it was on the zipper tag of that bag.
Yes, exactly.
Ma'am, we can agree that using one finger, one cannot unzip a bag.
Yes, of course, but it's actually fairly standard to only get a partial print. When you touch something, your finger doesn't always leave a perfectly readable or usable imprint. So just because there's only one readable print, it doesn't mean that the person didn't use two fingers.
But ma'am, redirecting you back to my question, using one finger on a zipper tag, you can't unzip a bag, right?
Yes, I agree.
Finally, ma'am, you can't tell us whether Miss Rogers has ever touched the black bag you found in Drew Mars's closet, right?
All I can tell you is that we didn't find Miss Rogers' fingerprint on the bag, only Drew Mars.
Well, ma'am, if Miss Rogers, she had worn gloves and touched that black bag, she wouldn't have left a single fingerprint, right?
Yes, that's possible.
And on that bottle, you didn't find, Miss Rogers, you can't tell us whether she touched that bottle, right?
No, I can't tell you anything about that. There were no usable prints on the bottle.
Ma'am, if Miss Rogers had worn gloves and touched that bottle, she wouldn't have gotten a single fingerprint on that bottle, right?
Yes, that's possible.
And ma'am, you were at the Lee Manor on the night of August 14th, right?
No, I was not there the night that Miss Lee died.
So you can't tell us you saw who switched Miss Lee's arthritis pills with the pills that killed her.
No, I can't. There were no eyewitnesses to this crime.
Thank you, Ms. Bond. No further questions.
Okay,
A brief redirect, Your Honor.
okay. Go ahead.
Now, Ms. Bond, Mr. Ng has asked you a couple questions about gloves. When you searched Lee Manor, did you find any latex gloves or any gloves of any sorts?
No, the only thing that the police found in Miss Rogers' room was a novel. They didn't find any gloves.
Thank you, ma'am. No further questions, Your Honor.
All right. Thank you, ma'am.
Brief recross, Your Honor.
Briefly.
Ma'am, if Stevie Rogers had disposed those gloves, you wouldn't have found them, right?
Right.
No further questions.
All right. All right. Thank you, Ms. Bond.
At this point, Your Honor, the plaintiff rests.
Okay. We will now take a 5-minute break. Judges, please remember that this video is being publicly broadcast via YouTube live stream. We'll see you all again shortly in 5 minutes.
All right, if I could have the judges let me know if we're all back, if you could send me a message or turn on your video. All right. Your Honor, I think we're missing one judge still, sir.
Okay.
Waiting for this one judge to come back. Sir.
She's background.
Just waiting on one judge, Your Honor.
Do you think we may have to call the judge?
I've sent them a message. I'm just waiting to hear back from them.
Okay. Is just the two of us right now?
No, sir, we're still on live stream. If you want to send me a message, you can go into chat.
That's
and
okay.
a private message.
That's,
Hi, students. We're still waiting on one judge.
Okay, Your Honor, no problem.
Okay. All right, we've got him, so we're good. So I'm going to go ahead and bring the students back.
good.
All right.
Ready?
1 second, Your Honor, while we have all the students return, I believe if we have everyone back, then we are prepared to proceed, Your Honor.
Okay. All right, everyone is back and ready to go. Defense, please call your first witness.
Yes, Your Honor. The defense calls Drew Mars.
All right, Ms. Mars.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Direct examination. Counsel, please proceed.
Good morning. Could you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
Good afternoon. My name is Drew Mars.
Can you tell us a bit about yourself?
Sure. I spent most of my childhood in Philadelphia. When I was 14, I moved to Alabama to take care of my grandmother with my mom and my sisters. My grandmother had Alzheimer's. It was hard on my family. That's why I decided to become a nurse. I got my degree from Alex Taylor College back in 2009.
Drew, we've heard a lot of allegations about you today, and I want to give you the chance to respond. Did you kill Agatha Lee?
No, absolutely not.
Did you ever want to hurt Miss Lee?
Of course not. Agatha wasn't just my boss. She wasn't just some name on a paycheck. She was family to me.
All right, I want to take a step back. When did you first start working for Miss Lee?
I started as her assistant caretaker in 2008 while I was still in college. And then in 2009, she hired me full-time once I graduated.
Were you happy with your job?
Very. Agatha was more than generous with me, and she was my closest friend. I loved working for her.
Can you tell us about your relationship with Miss Lee during that decade that you knew her?
Happily. Agatha was like a grandmother to me. She reminded me of my own. We'd sit in her study and read together, play backgammon, eat sour candy, and watch Seinfeld reruns. Like I said before, Agatha was family to me, and I think she felt that way about me too.
Objection, Your Honor. Speculation to the statement, I think Agatha Lee felt that same way about me.
May I respond, Your Honor?
No, objections overruled. Go ahead.
Ms. Mars, why do you say you believe Agatha felt that you were family to her?
She wrote me into her will. She changed it, told me that she loved me and that she wanted to leave everything to me.
When did Miss Lee change her will?
She showed me the new will in February of 2018.
And when she showed you that new will, did you ever have a chance to see her previous will?
Yes, she showed me the original too.
Do you know who that will, named as Miss Lee's heir?
Yes, it was Stevie Rogers.
All right, I want to talk about the plaintiff. Can you tell us about her?
Sure. Stevie is the person suing me today. She's Agatha's granddaughter. She was the only family that Agatha had left after her daughter passed back in 2008. It was a car accident on 95. I thought the loss would kill Agatha. I mean, she was beside herself, and then she lost Stevie too. It was devastating.
What do you mean when she lost Stevie too?
Well, after Veronica died, Stevie and Agatha fell out of touch. She stopped coming to visit. She didn't call, she didn't write, but I guess things changed.
Objection, Your Honor. Lack of foundation that Stevie Rogers didn't call or didn't write during that time. And we understand Miss Mars was living with Agatha Lee, but just the fact that they were living together doesn't mean that she can tell us she knows exactly what phone calls Agatha Lee was receiving. We have no foundation on the record for how Miss Mars would be able to make this statement in particular, Your Honor.
Respond, Your Honor?
Yes.
Ms. Mars has already testified that she lived with Agatha Lee full-time, that she spent most of the day as her caretaker. She's only testifying to the best of her knowledge what she observed, that Stevie Rogers stopped calling and stopped writing.
May I respond, Your Honor?
The objection is sustained. This calls for speculation.
Move to strike, Your Honor.
Motion sustained. Proceed.
Yes, Your Honor.
Proceed, counsel.
So Ms. Mars, just speaking of what you observed, did Stevie Rogers and Agatha Lee communicate during that time?
I didn't see them communicate. I didn't hear Stevie call Agatha. I didn't receive any letters when I got the mail from Stevie sent to Agatha. So I guess not that I saw.
And you mentioned that some things changed. What did you mean by that?
Stevie showed up again in Agatha's life back in July of 2018. She said she needed a place to stay, so she moved in with us.
Did the plaintiff and Miss Lee spend time together after she moved in?
At first, not so much, no. Agatha kept Stevie at arm's length. But eventually, yes, they started spending a lot of time together until August 14th. Things started to fall apart.
Objection, Your Honor. Speculation to both of those statements. First, that Agatha Lee was keeping Stevie Rogers at arm's length, and second, that their relationship started to fall apart. If this information is based on statements, if Agatha told her that, then it's hearsay. And if it's not based on statements, then it's speculation.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Yes.
Ms. Mars is again only testifying to what she observed. I asked her what she observed about the plaintiff and Miss Lee's interactions during that time frame. Furthermore, the statement that things began to fall apart, if I may make an offer of proof,
Go ahead.
I expect that Ms. Mars will go on to talk about a specific conversation that she overheard between Stevie Rogers and Agatha Lee. Now, when we get to those specific statements, I'm happy to discuss the hearsay objection, but I think that's a bit premature.
May I respond, Your Honor?
I'm going to overrule the objection and let this matter proceed. I have some concern about the hearsay issue, but let's get to that. We're not there yet.
Yes, Your Honor.
So, Ms. Mars, you said things changed. What did you mean by that?
Well, on the 14th, I overheard Agatha and Stevie having a conversation in Agatha's study. And from what I could hear, it sounded contentious.
How did you overhear that conversation?
I'd made Agatha some tea, her favorite English breakfast. And when I came upstairs to deliver it, I could hear them once I got to the door.
What did you hear them say?
They were talking about Agatha's will. I heard Stevie bring it up. She asked Agatha to change the will, to write her back in. She sounded very insistent, repeating herself over and over and over again.
How did Miss Lee respond?
She was kind, like she always was. But she said that she wanted to help Stevie, but that's why she couldn't give her a penny, that she'd be failing her if she did.
When Ms. Lee said that she wouldn't give Stevie Rogers a penny, how did the plaintiff respond?
Stevie tried to argue, but Agatha said that that was enough, that her mind was made up.
Ms. Rang, if you could please put that mark on the timeline. Ms. Mars, what happened after that conversation?
Your Honor, at this time, I would re-raise my objection to the statement, their relationship started to fall apart. We heard they had a conversation about their will, that Stevie Rogers was taken out of the will. We haven't heard any foundation to suggest their relationship was actually falling apart, just that they talked about Agatha's will. That statement, Your Honor, is speculation.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Yes.
Ms. Mars just testified to a conversation in which Ms. Rogers insistently begged Ms. Lee to change her will to write her back in, and Ms. Lee refused and said that her mind was made up. Ms. Mars described an argument between the two. That goes directly to that relationship. And for her to testify to that relationship falling apart after that conversation, that's rashly based on her perception that she overheard an argument.
Brief response, Your Honor.
I'm going to overrule the objection. I think that this is a very close call, but based upon the evidence so far, I don't think that there's been any violation of the rules of evidence. Let's hear what the remainder of this witness has to say.
Yes, Your Honor.
Objection overruled.
So Ms. Mars, can you tell us what happened after you overheard that conversation?
I didn't hear Stevie say anything else. and then they walked out of the room. When Agatha was in the room, Stevie glared at me, but she didn't say anything. But then once Agatha was out of earshot, Stevie turned to me and said, "Don't count your millions just yet."
I want to talk about what happened the next day, August 15th.
Sure.
How did that day start?
Like most days, I got up early, made myself some tea. But around 8:30, I hadn't seen Agatha yet. So I went to check on her.
What did you find when you went to check on her?
That's when I found her. At first, I thought she was just still asleep. But when I went to her bedside, she wasn't breathing. She didn't have a pulse. She was gone.
What did you do when you found out that Miss Lee had passed away?
I couldn't breathe. I mean, I could barely walk. I remember stumbling into Stevie's room to tell him. And I think I remember him calling the police.
Drew, do you know why Miss Lee passed away?
At first, I thought she just passed in her sleep. I mean, she was 82 years old. But I found out later that she'd been given chlorandramine.
We've heard today that Miss Lee was fatally allergic to chlorandramine. Did you know about this allergy?
I did. Her last caretaker told me.
Have you ever purchased chlorandramine?
No, I've never purchased chlorandramine.
Drew, can you tell us where Miss Lee kept the medications she took regularly?
She had a pill organizer next to her bed. It was my job to fill it on Saturdays.
Did you touch that pill organizer on August 14th?
No, that was a Tuesday. I'd already filled it for the week.
Drew, do you remember when Miss Bond took the stand and talked about a bag they found in your closet?
Yes, I was here for that.
Did that bag belong to you?
No, I hadn't seen that bag until my deposition. I'd never seen it before in my life.
Ms. Mars, does anyone other than you have access to your closet?
Yes. Our doors don't have locks except for the ones in Agatha's room. And Stevie was home alone all day on the 14th. So, yes.
Objection, Your Honor. Lack of foundation that Stevie Rogers was home alone all day on the 14th. We have a good faith basis to believe that Miss Mars herself was not home alone that day. So she can't know where Stevie Rogers was when she was not in the house.
Overruled, counsel. That's subject to cross-examination. You can bring that up again.
Ms. Mars, do you know if Stevie Rogers touched Miss Lee's pill organizer that day?
I'm not sure. Like I said, I wasn't with Stevie for the whole day. We left him at home. We left her at home when we went to Agatha's appointment. So I can tell you what she did.
Ms. Mars, aside from you and Agatha Lee, who else was in the house on August 14th?
The only other person was Stevie.
Thank you, Ms. Mars. I have nothing further, Your Honor.
Okay, cross-examine.
Yes, Your Honor. Hi, Ms. Mars. I'm going to be asking you some questions today. Before I begin, can you see and hear me all right?
Yes, that's fine.
Ma'am, I want to start off by talking about Agatha's will. Now,
Okay.
You knew that Agatha Lee put you into her will, right?
Yes, in February, she told me she loved me and that's why she was changing it.
You knew that meant you would get her mansion, right?
Her mansion, her assets, some books that she'd written.
Well, Ms. Mars, I want to break that down. You knew you'd get the rights to her famous book, right?
Yes, Death in a Bottle. It was the best-selling work of Agatha's.
And her assets, almost $20 million in cash. Is that right?
As I understand, but before, honestly, I thought it was even more than that. Numbers that big are hard for me to fathom.
That's right. Ms. Mars, you thought you were inheriting even more than $20 million. Is that right?
Yes, I can't really imagine the difference between 20 and 25 million. The number is so big, but yes, you're right.
Ms. Mars, you needed that money, didn't you?
In a sense,
Well, you'd agree with me, you had a sick sibling, is that right?
yes, I sent all of the money that Agatha paid me home to my family. I didn't come from much, and my sister is sick.
Ma'am, in your own words, the money from Agatha's estate, well, your family needed that, didn't they?
Yes, I sent it all back to them.
Well, ma'am, I'm not talking about your salary. I'm talking about the money you were going to inherit. In your own words, your family needed that money.
Yes, we didn't have a lot.
You thought that this money would change your life. Is that right?
Absolutely. I think that $20 million would change anyone's life, certainly mine.
Ms. Mars, you've been sitting here in court all day today. Is that right?
I have.
Mr. Nybar, could we get that timeline back up on the screen? Ma'am, you were sitting here when Stevie Rogers testified. Is that right?
Yes, I was here.
You heard Stevie Rogers say that your grandmother was changing her will?
I heard Stevie say that, but that's not the conversation I heard in August.
Mr. Nybar, could we focus in on August 14th, please? Ma'am, you're claiming that's not how that conversation went. Is that right?
Well, the things on this screen are incorrect. It says 11:30 a.m. Agatha tells Stevie she is leaving her entire estate to Stevie, but that's not what happened. Agatha said she couldn't give Stevie anything.
Well, that's right, Ms. Mars. You think that what's written up here is wrong. Is that right?
I don't think, ma'am, I know. I heard their conversation.
All right, Ms. Mars, I want to talk about what you did right after this conversation happened.
The conversation on the screen is wrong, ma'am. That's not what happened.
Well, ma'am, I want to talk about you would agree with me. You heard a conversation between Agatha and Stevie, right?
Yes, Agatha told Stevie that she wasn't changing the will. And then Stevie said to me, don't count your millions just yet.
All right, ma'am, I know that's what you're telling us today, but I want to talk about what you did right after that conversation. Ma'am, you got in your car, right?
I took Agatha to an appointment, yes.
And after you took Agatha to that appointment, you went to a pharmacy. Is that right?
That's right. I had some errands to run.
Ma'am, when you walked into that pharmacy on August 14th, you knew that Agatha Lee was allergic to chloroandramine, right?
Yes, I've known that for over a decade now since I became her caretaker.
You knew that chloroandramine was available over the counter at any pharmacy, right?
Yes, I'm a nurse. I know things like that.
You knew that just one pill of chloroandramine could kill Agatha Lee. Is that right?
She was fatally allergic. She'd actually had a heart attack before because of chloroandramine, but she made a full recovery. Agatha was the strongest woman I knew.
Ms. Mars, directing you back to my question, you knew that just one pill of chloroandramine could kill Agatha Lee, right?
Like I said, she had a fatal allergy, yes.
Ma'am, you're claiming you didn't purchase chloroandramine that day, right?
I didn't purchase chloroandramine that day.
Ms. Mars, you don't have a receipt for your purchase that day, do you?
No, ma'am, it was a drugstore. I'm sure I said I didn't need the receipt.
In fact, you're claiming you don't even remember what you bought that day. Do I have that right?
That's right, ma'am. I ran into the drugstore. I couldn't have been there for more than 5 minutes. Maybe I got hair ties. I'm not sure.
Ms. Mars, you heard Ms. Bond testify, didn't you?
I was here, yes.
You heard that a black bag was found in your closet containing chloroandramine?
I heard that, yes.
Man, when you were deposed, the lawyers, they asked you about that bag, didn't they?
They did.
They asked you if you had ever touched that bag before. Is that right?
That's right. I hadn't. I understand that my fingerprint was found on the zipper, but I have no idea how that happened. I've never seen that bag before.
Well, Ms. Mars, you'd agree with me. The attorneys did ask you if you had ever touched it before, right?
That's what they asked, yes.
And in response, you said never. Is that right?
That's right. I don't remember ever touching that bag. I hear it was in my closet, so maybe I moved it, but I don't remember ever seeing it before in my life.
Well, Ms. Mars, I want to be clear. When the attorneys asked you that, you didn't tell them maybe I moved it, did you?
No, ma'am, because I didn't know that my fingerprint was on it. I'm trying to make sense of what happened.
That's right, ma'am. You know that even though you said you had never touched it, your fingerprint was found on that bag.
Exactly. I have no idea how that happened.
Ms. Mars, I want to talk about what happened after Agatha died. Mr. Nybar, could you
Okay.
go ahead and zoom out on thank you, taking it down. Now, ma'am, after Agatha Lee died, you went to her will reading, is that right?
On the 20th, yes.
On August 20th, you heard the lawyer say that you were getting the contents of Agatha's will, is that right?
They read the will, and Agatha had left everything to me. That's right.
And ma'am, when you heard that, you stood up, didn't you?
Yes. I said I couldn't believe it.
You covered your mouth with your hands, right?
Yes, I believe I stood up, covered my mouth, and said I couldn't believe it, that I had no idea.
That's right, ma'am. You didn't just say I couldn't believe it. You said I had no idea. Is that right?
That's right.
You said that over and over again?
3, maybe 4 times.
And then you walked out of the room, right?
That's right.
Ms. Mars, that was a lie.
It's true. I did know that I was inheriting Agatha's will, but I was so overwhelmed. Honestly, I panicked. Stevie was talking about murder, and I panicked.
So, Ms. Mars, to be clear, you lied because you panicked? Is that what you're telling this jury today?
Yes, I was very overwhelmed. Bond was asking me all sorts of questions, and I was overwhelmed.
To be clear, you actually had known about that will since February, right?
That's right, when Agatha changed it.
Mr. Nybar, can we get Exhibit 13 on the screen? Your Honor, this was previously entered into evidence. Now, ma'am, this is an email you wrote after you found out about the will money, right?
Yes, after I found out about the will, I sent this email. That's right.
This was months before that will reading, wasn't it?
Yes, like I said, it was in February when Agatha told me about the will. That's when I sent the email.
In this email, you say, I get everything. The house, the money, everything. Is that right?
That's right. Agatha told me about what she owned.
You said, this is going to totally change my life.
Your Honor, at this point, this testimony is needlessly cumulative. We've already gone through the exact statements on this document. The jury has this document and evidence to look at. So repeating this document and having Ms. Mars confirm what we've already read several times, that's needlessly cumulative under Rule 403.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Yes.
Your Honor, Ms. Mars is the defendant in today's case. It's important for her to be confronted with this evidence of her lying, and for the jury to hear what she has to say about that. It's not needlessly cumulative, Your Honor. There is significant probative value to this.
Your Honor, at this point, we're just restating the sentences as they're read on the document.
Yeah. We are getting very repetitious, counsel, so I'll sustain the objection and ask you to move on.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Nybart, you can take the exhibit down. Thank you. Oh, ma'am, August 20th, that's when the will reading was, is that right?
Like I said, yes.
You found out about the will months before that. Do I have that right?
Yes, like I've said before, I found out about the will in February. Agatha died in August.
Thank you, ma'am. Your Honor, I have nothing further at this time.
Okay. Call your next witness.
Yes, Your Honor, we have no redirect, so we just ask that Ms. Mars be excused.
Yes, you're excused, ma'am.
The defense calls Rhian Cabrera to the stand. May we proceed?
Yes.
Could you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
Yeah, hello, my name is Riri. Well, okay, so my real name is Rhian Cabrera. But I think that Riri is just, it has a bit of more spice, so I go by Riri. That's what you can call me.
What do you do for a living, Riri?
Well, I'm a biographer. So I fly around the world, meeting the most amazing people. And then I write stories about their lives.
How did you become a biographer?
Well, I love getting to know people intimately, So I was always asking questions when I was younger. And then I started to write these little books about the people I knew. And I loved seeing how happy the people were when I showed them these books. So anyways, things developed from there until Riri became the world-famous writer you see here today.
Did you ever work with a person named Agatha Lee?
Yeah, I was actually writing a biography of Miss Lee before she passed away. Miss Lee was,
Now,
oh, sorry.
excuse me, sir.
I was just saying Miss Lee, she was such a schnitzel of a lady, elusive, intelligent, mysterious. She was my favorite kind of subject to work with.
How'd you meet Miss Lee?
I reached out to her like 2 years ago, and then for the next 6 months, we would talk every single week.
Where would you meet?
Usually over a lunch. But as we started to get closer, she would invite me into the house. We got pretty close, I would say by the end, we were kind of like a Hansel und Gretel.
Did you ever run into a person named Drew Mars at her residence?
Yeah, of course.
Could you tell us a little bit about Drew Mars?
Totally. Drew was Miss Lee's, personal maid, chef, butler, all of it. By the time that I met her, Drew had been at the house for like 10 years or something like that.
And from your perspective, what was Drew's relationship like with Miss Agatha Lee?
It was beautiful. It was like Americans and their hamburgers. If you had one without the other, it just wouldn't be the same. Miss Lee really treated, Drew as a granddaughter and vice versa.
Did Miss Lee and you ever talk about her biological family?
Yeah. At first, Miss Lee didn't really want to talk about Stevie. That's her biological granddaughter. But as we got closer, she would give me like a piece here, a piece there, like that.
What did you learn?
Miss Lee would say that she really missed Stevie and that she felt abandoned by her.
Did she say anything else?
Objection, Your Honor, to hearsay.
Response?
Yes.
Your Honor, these statements fall under an exception of hearsay under 8033. They refer to a then existing emotional condition. Mr. Cabrera just said that Agatha Lee said that she missed him. Your Honor, those fall under the exception.
I don't think that they do, counsel, and this would open up a Pandora's box. If I let this witness testify about a casual conversation he had with the decedent, the cat's out of the bag and nobody could cross-examine. So the objection is sustained.
I move to strike the offending testimony, Your Honor.
All right, sustained.
Sir, did you ever meet Stevie Rogers?
Yeah, one time in July of 2018, Stevie showed up out of nowhere.
And what was their relationship like, Stevie and her grandmother?
Not bad at first. In fact, I started seeing Miss Lee smile and laugh, kind of like a girl at Oktoberfest, She really seemed happier at first.
Sir, you said at first. How did that change?
Well, the last time I saw Miss Lee alive, her whole mojo was just totally different.
What happened?
Well, she had been laughing and smiling the whole summer, but that day there was just none of that.
When was that, sir?
That was August 14th, 2018. We were having our usual lunch, so it was probably around noon.
And you said her behavior changed. What happened?
So like I said, we were having our usual lunch. And then out of nowhere, she started talking about Stevie. That's her granddaughter,
What did she say?
She mentioned, how much she felt she loved Stevie, but that she would have to say no.
Objection, Your Honor, to hearsay. Again, the witness is testifying to statements of the decedent, and therefore they're being offered the truth of the matter in our hearsay.
Response, Your Honor?
Yes.
Your Honor, if I could direct your attention to the actual rules 8033, those are the exceptions to hearsay.
Your Honor, 8033 tells us that statements of emotional feelings or plans, then existing emotional feelings or plans, they're admissible under 8033, exceptions to hearsay. Mr. Cabrera just said that she felt, the statement was that she felt that she loved her son, excuse me, her granddaughter. And Your Honor, that clearly falls under the exception of 8033.
What is the emotional aspect of the exception here?
Your Honor, the language of the law tells us that the emotional aspect of that statement is that she did in fact love her granddaughter, Your Honor. That's what the truth of the matter of that statement is. And because it relates to her feelings, it qualifies under that exception.
I don't think so, counsel. If that conversation qualifies as the exception, virtually anything would qualify. And I think that the emotional aspect they're referring to usually is intense anger, what we used to call a dying declaration, statements made in the heat of the moment. This was, once again, as I said earlier, that from what I just heard, this was a casual conversation. So anyway, objection sustained.
Mr. Cabrera, did you find out when Miss Lee died?
Yeah, so after we had this really sad conversation with Miss Lee, the next day I got a call from Drew.
What happened?
The poor girl was crying, sobbing. You know, I could barely understand a word she was saying.
Were you able to find and hear what she said at the end?
Well, yeah. Eventually, I understood she was saying that Miss Lee was not with us anymore.
Thank you, sir. No further questions.
Any other counsel?
Cross-examination, Your Honor.
Yes, go ahead.
May I proceed, Your Honor?
Yes.
Now, Mr. Cabrera, you talked about an interaction you had with Agatha Lee in August of 2018. I want to talk about something you saw in May of that same year, all right?
Yeah, okay, sounds good.
Now, in May of 2018, you saw the defendant walk into Agatha Lee's bedroom, right?
Yeah.
She was holding a glass of water and some medicine in the other hand, right?
Right, so that was Drew's job. It was like she took care of Miss Lee. You know, Miss Lee had some medication she took, so it was Drew's job to give her some medication she needed.
That's right. So that's a yes to my question. She was holding a glass of water and a pill in the other hand, right?
Yeah, she was taking care of Miss Lee.
And as the defendant was approaching Miss Lee, she started describing the pill in her hand, right?
Yeah.
She was telling Miss Lee exactly what medication she was giving her, right?
Right. Drew was like super careful and very attention to detail, you know?
That's right, sir. But Miss Lee stopped the defendant, right?
Yeah. She said, "Oh dear, you know you don't have to tell me. It's okay. I trust you. You can give it to me." Which is totally fair because, you know, Drew was just like such a kind, caring person. Honestly, she could have given me like something insane, like a Dutch beer, and I would have drinking it, you know?
But sir, that's a yes to my question. You saw the defendant describing that and Miss Lee stopped him, right?
Right.
And Miss Lee told the defendant, you know I'll take whatever you hand me, right?
Yeah.
Like you said
Objection, Your Honor, hearsay.
Witness just said it. Are you kidding me?
Okay, overruled. Go ahead.
Excuse me.
Go ahead. Yes. Objections overruled. Proceed.
Now, sir, I want to talk about your relationship with Miss Lee. You were writing a biography about her, right?
Yeah, it was going to be best-selling because Miss Lee was just such an interesting person.
Sir, so you know that at age 32, Miss Lee wrote a mystery novel called Death in a Bottle, right?
Yeah.
Sir, you'd agree with me that novel was pretty popular, right?
Hugely popular.
It was translated into 100 languages, right?
Yeah, for a writer like myself, Miss Lee was honestly a bit of an inspiration.
Sir, that's a yes. It was translated into 100 languages, right?
Yeah.
Sir, that novel, it sold 65 million copies, right?
Yeah, truly an inspiration, like I said.
Now, sir, when you first met Miss Lee, you thought she never wrote a second book, right?
Everybody did.
Sir, you actually wondered why Miss Lee never wrote a second novel, right?
Yeah, like I said, everybody did. If you can write such a good novel, why would you just stop with one?
That's right, sir. You believe that if Miss Lee wrote a second novel, that second novel would be pretty popular, right?
Yeah, I mean, that seems pretty logical.
So finally, sir, on August 14th of 2018, you asked Miss Lee why she never wrote a second book, right?
Yeah, that was right after that conversation we were talking about earlier, when she was describing the stuff with Stevie.
Sir, that's a yes. You asked Miss Lee why she never wrote a second book, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Sir, and after you asked her that, you learned that she had written other books, right?
Yeah, can you believe it? This was crazy. She had other books she had written, but she just never published them. It was like, oh my God.
That's right, sir. You learned that Miss Lee had unpublished books in her home, right?
Yeah.
Sir, I want to talk about why you're testifying here in court today. You're familiar with Agatha Lee's will, right?
Yeah, I'm testifying because I saw things, I was there for like 6 months, so I just came to tell you what I know.
Well, sir, we'll get there, but you're familiar with Miss Lee's will, right?
Yeah, she showed me the will where she was leaving everything to Stevie, and then, their relationship got bad. She was like feeling abandoned by Stevie, so then she changed the will to Drew.
Sir, that wasn't my question. I asked if you're familiar with her will, and you are, right?
Yeah, both of them, the old one and the new one.
Ms. Mehta, can we see Exhibit 9, please? Now, sir, this is Exhibit 9, that will we were just talking about, right?
Yeah, this is, so this is a new one.
That's right, sir. This is the will from 2018, right?
Yeah.
Sir, it's a fair and accurate copy.
Yeah.
It hasn't been changed or altered in any way, right?
Not that I can see, no.
Your Honor, this time the plaintiff moves Exhibit 9 into evidence.
Without objections.
All right, let it be received.
Sir, you know that in this will, Miss Lee was going to leave her entire estate to Drew Mars, right?
Yeah, like I said, they had a beautiful relationship. It was like Drew became Miss Lee's real granddaughter. They were that close.
Sir, I didn't ask you about the relationship. I asked you about this will, and you know that Miss Lee was leaving her entire estate to Drew Mars, right?
Yeah, exactly. And you can see she says, I don't want Stevie to inherit anything. It's right there.
Sir, she was leaving all real and personal property to Drew Mars, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Now, sir, 2 months ago, in June of 2020, you got a call from Drew Mars, right?
Right. And Drew was like, look, there's this crazy lawsuit going on. Would you like to come and say what you know? And I was like, yeah, of course.
Sir, we'll get there, but you did get a call from Drew Mars in June of 2020, right?
Yeah.
And the defendant asked you something pretty important, right?
Yeah, like I just said.
The defendant asked you to testify in court today, right?
Yeah.
Sir, of course you agreed, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, I like writing, but I also love talking.
And sir, right after you agreed to testify, the defendant asked you another question, right?
Yeah, they said that, she recognized that me and Miss Lee were very close. We had grown close over the time. And she wanted to know if there was anything I would like from Miss Lee.
That's right, sir. Right after you agreed to testify, the defendant asked you, on an unrelated note, is there anything of Agatha's you might want? She asked you that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And sir, you told the defendant that you wanted those books, those unpublished novels that Miss Lee wrote, right?
Yeah.
Sir, and the defendant told you in response to that if at the end of today's trial she still possessed those books, she would give them to you, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Sir, you agree with me, those books, those unpublished novels, they're pretty valuable, right?
I don't know what the dollar value is, but for a literary person like myself, they have a lot of value, yeah.
Well, sir, you'd agree with me, you can't even fathom how much those books would be worth, right?
Yeah, it was like if, I don't know, Plato had like an unpublished book or something. It would be a big deal.
Thank you, sir. We have no further questions at this time, Your Honor.
All right.
Redirect, Your Honor?
Yes. Briefly. Go ahead.
Mr. Cabrera, do you remember this document that Mr. Nyberg just showed you?
Yeah, so other guy was just, yeah, he had this up earlier.
Could you read that last sentence under Article 2?
Yeah, so Miss Lee says, so long as Drew Mars survives me, I specifically intend to exclude my grandchild Stevie Rogers from receiving any benefit from my estate or under this will. Like I said, you know, Stevie and her had a pretty bad relationship for a while there.
Thank you. No further questions.
Okay, this witness may be excused, I assume, counsel?
Yes, Your Honor, no recross.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cabrera.
With that, the defense rests.
Okay. All right, now, counsel, according to my script, we do not have a break now. We'll get right into closing arguments. We will now hear closing arguments from each party. Everyone should please switch back to speaker view.
Your Honor, may the plaintiff proceed?
Yes.
Your Honor, opposing counsel, members of the jury, there have been a lot of things said from the beginning to the end of today's trial. But there was one moment that stood out to me in particular. The defendant, Drew Mars, took the stand today and told you under oath that after Agatha Lee was killed, she lied. She told everyone that she had no idea about the will, when in reality, she had learned of it 6 months before. Members of the jury, she lied to us on August 20th of 2018, and she lied to us today in court. She lied to us about her desperation for Agatha's money. She lied to us about her access to the drugs that killed Agatha Lee. She lied to us about the way she tried to deceive people after the murder. Members of the jury, desperation, drugs, and deceit. That's all this case comes down to. But before we talk about the evidence that points to the defendant, I want to talk about the law. Because today you heard that Drew Mars was going to inherit Agatha Lee's entire estate. That's nearly $20 million. But members of the jury in this state, if you kill someone, you can't inherit their money. It doesn't matter if you're in the will or not. But that's exactly what happened in today's case. That's why Stevie Rogers, the plaintiff, has sued Drew Mars to stop the defendant from walking away with her grandmother's entire fortune. So as the plaintiff, we had to prove today that Drew Mars purposely or knowingly killed Agatha Lee, in other words, that the defendant intentionally ended Agatha Lee's life. Now, members of the jury, you might have seen shows like Law & Order, where the attorneys, they had to prove their charges beyond a reasonable doubt, but this isn't a murder trial. We don't have to prove anything beyond a reasonable doubt. The only question we have to answer today is whether it's more likely than not that Drew Mars killed Agatha Lee. And members of the jury, the answer to that question is yes. Because when you go back to deliberate today, I want you to focus on three things: desperation, drugs, and deceit. If you focus on the defendant's desperation for Agatha's money, if you focus on the drugs she used to kill her, if you focus on her deceit after the murder, members of the jury, it will be clear. Drew Mars killed Agatha Lee, and she is liable. For members of the jury, let's take those one at a time. First, the defendant's desperation. Well, today you heard the defendant, she needed money. She had a sick relative back at home, a sick relative she needed to help. But Drew Mars at first thought she was going to be okay. She knew she was in Agatha Lee's will. She knew she was going to be fine after Agatha Lee had died. But members of the jury, on August 14th, that all came crashing down. When the defendant overheard a conversation between Stevie Rogers and Miss Lee, where Miss Lee promised Stevie Rogers to put her into the will and to take Drew Mars out. Members of the jury, when the defendant heard that, she panicked. She knew she had to do something to stop Miss Lee from changing her will. She got desperate. Members of the jury, just hours later, Agatha Lee was found dead. Which takes us to our next point, the drugs. Because today it heard that Drew Mars was Agatha Lee's caretaker. Agatha Lee trusted the defendant implicitly. She even told the defendant, "You know I'll take whatever you hand me." So when the defendant's money was in jeopardy, when he got desperate, he knew he had a way out. The drugs. Because today we heard about something called chlorandramine. It's an over-the-counter medication, but Agatha Lee had a fatal allergy to it. The defendant even told Stevie Rogers that just one pill and Agatha would be dead. And we heard that chlorandramine and Agatha Lee's daily medications are identical. So members of the jury, when the time came, when the defendant had to act, she knew what to do. She swapped the pills. She drugged Miss Lee. She gave her the medication that would kill her. And members of the jury, how do we know this? Well, we heard about exhibits 14, 15, and 17, which shows us that it was Drew Mars, not Stevie Rogers, who had a bag of chlorandramine in her closet. It was Drew Mars, not Stevie Rogers, whose fingerprint was found right on that bag. Members of the jury, it was Drew Mars, not Stevie Rogers, who killed Agatha Lee. But members of the jury, that takes us to our third point, the deceit. Because today you heard that on August 20th of 2018, Agatha Lee's will was read aloud to a room full of people. Her lawyers announced that Drew Mars was going to inherit her entire estate. Members of the jury, ask yourselves, how did the defendant respond? Well, she stood up. She said, "I had no idea, I had no idea," and then she stormed out of the room. She acted shocked. She acted surprised. But members of the jury, that's all it was. It was an act. Because today you heard that 6 months earlier. In February of 2018, the defendant wrote an email to a friend. The defendant says, "Agatha just told me she changed her will to leave everything to me. I get everything, the house, the money, everything. We're talking millions of dollars. This is going to totally change my life." So members of the jury, ask yourselves, if the defendant was an innocent bystander, she had nothing to do with this crime, why would she lie? If the defendant was an innocent bystander, why would she get up in front of everyone and make a scene? If the defendant was an innocent bystander, why wouldn't she be upfront about getting the money? Well, members of the jury, we know why. The defendant wasn't an innocent bystander. She was trying to cover up what she had done. But the defense, they don't want you to focus on that. They don't want you to focus on the defendant's deception, the drugs, or her desperation. They want you to focus on another story. They want you to believe that Stevie Rogers poisoned Agatha Lee, put those pills of chlorandramine in that black bag, zipped it up, and then planted it in the defendant's closet. But members of the jury, did we find Stevie Rogers' fingerprints in the defendant's room? In her closet? On that bag or the pills themselves? No. And then the defense wants you to believe that Drew Mars accidentally touched that bag zipper after telling the police she had never seen it or touched it at all. Members of the jury, none of that is reasonable, none of that is likely, but if you're still not convinced, if you still agree with the defense, if you still think Stevie Rogers set up Drew Mars, I want you to think about the defendant's words. Things she said before she even entered court today. "I get everything, the house, the money, everything. If Agatha took just one pill, she'd be dead. I had no idea, I had no idea." Members of the jury, when you listen to the defendant's words, all you're going to hear is desperation, drugs, and deceit. That's why we're asking you to hold the defendant accountable. That's why we're asking you to find her liable. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Defense counsel.
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed with closing arguments?
Yes.
May it please the court, excuse me, Mr. Nybar, members of the jury. It was all part of her plan. Mr. Nybart just came up here and told you this case is about desperation, drugs, and deceit. And we couldn't agree more. Someone was desperate to inherit Miss Lee's estate. Someone switched Miss Lee's medication for a deadly drug. Someone took that stand today, members of the jury, and they tried to deceive you. But that's where we have to stop agreeing with the plaintiff, because that someone wasn't Drew Mars. Now, that someone was Stevie Rogers, and it was all part of her plan. Today, the plaintiff is suing Drew Mars over Agatha Lee's estate. And when they filed that lawsuit, they took on a burden to prove to you that it is more likely than not that Drew Mars killed Miss Lee. What that means, members of the jury, is that if you think there's another scenario that's more likely, if you think there's another scenario that's even equally likely, then they haven't met their burden. And they didn't. At the beginning of this trial, my colleague Josh Ng asked you to keep 3 questions in mind. First, did Stevie Rogers have access to the pills that killed Miss Lee? Second, did Stevie Rogers have a reason to kill Miss Lee? And third, could Stevie Rogers have committed this crime? I want to walk through those questions, members of the jury, because as we do, we'll walk through Stevie Rogers' plan. First, did Stevie Rogers have access to the pills? Stevie Rogers told us today that she knew about Miss Lee's fatal allergy. On August 14th, she was home alone for hours. And she could have purchased chloroandramine at any local pharmacy, switched Miss Lee's medication, and still had time to plant the evidence in Drew Mars' unlocked closet. Remember that bag the plaintiff showed you? And they tried to tell you that a fingerprint on the outside of that bag is enough to link it to Drew. But members of the jury, one partial print on the outside of that bag, that doesn't tell us that Drew ever even opened that bag, let alone touch the pills inside. It's entirely possible that Stevie Rogers bought those pills, that Stevie Rogers handled them while wearing gloves, and that Stevie Rogers put that bag in Drew's closet. So the answer to that first question is yes. And then Mr. Ng asked you whether Stevie Rogers had a reason to commit this crime. And you learned that the answer to that was yes, too. You see, Stevie Rogers has never had a regular job, and she's always relied on her trust fund. But in June of 2018, that trust fund ran out. Stevie Rogers hired a private investigator to find the grandmother she hadn't seen in 8 years. Why? Because she was rich. Agatha Lee was a millionaire, and Ms. Rogers could live off that money for the rest of her life. The problem, members of the jury, is that Stevie Rogers wasn't the person set to inherit that money. Drew Mars was. When Stevie Rogers begged Agatha Lee to change that will to write her back in, she refused. Stevie Rogers became desperate, and she came up with a plan. She knew that if Drew Mars was found responsible for Miss Lee's death, then that money would be hers. And so we know that we know that Stevie Rogers had access to the pills, and we know that she had a reason to kill Miss Lee. So let's look at that last question. Could Stevie Rogers have committed this crime? To answer that, I want to go back to the morning of August 15th, when Miss Lee was first found dead. When Stevie Rogers first found out her grandmother was dead, her 82-year-old grandmother who had passed away in her sleep, she called 911 and reported a murder. And then she called up her private investigator, pushed the police to order a toxicology screen, and filed this lawsuit before that tox screen even came back. Why did she do that? And she told you herself on the stand today. Stevie Rogers filed this lawsuit before that tox screen came back Because she already knew what it would show. She already knew what that talk screen would show because she was the one who had switched Miss Lee's pills. Because those pills, that talk screen, this trial, they're all part of her plan. So could Stevie Rogers have committed this crime? Members of the jury, Stevie Rogers did commit this crime. So now let's look at what the plaintiff brought you today. They tried to tell you that Miss Lee was going to change her will to write Drew out. But let's look at the will that she left us. Members of the jury, why would she go to the trouble of writing Stevie Rogers specifically out of this will, only to change her mind just a couple months later? And then the only other witness the plaintiff brought to corroborate their story was a private investigator the plaintiff hired. A private investigator the plaintiff has already paid $10,000 and has promised $25,000 more. Remember, members of the jury, Stevie Rogers doesn't have $25,000. She doesn't have a job, and her trust fund ran out back in 2018. So that private investigator, she knows that the only way she's getting paid is if Miss Rogers wins this trial. And she knows that the only way she's getting paid is if she plays right into Stevie Rogers' plan.
Time.
Members of the jury, find Drew Mars not liable. Thank you.
All right, thank you, counsel.
Rebuttal, Your Honor.
I didn't know rebuttal was on the docket.
Yes, Your Honor. I believe I have 50 seconds left for
Go
rebuttal.
ahead.
It's
Go
okay.
ahead.
Great. Thank you. May I proceed, Your Honor?
Yes.
Now, members of the jury, Ms. Shapiro got up here and told you it was all part of a plan. So I wanted to think about the plan she's alleging Stevie Rogers came up with. She wants you to think that Stevie Rogers killed her own grandma. It took a vial of chlorandramine, put it in a black bag, planted it in the defendant's closet, all without leaving a single fingerprint in the defendant's bedroom, the closet, anywhere in the house, to then hopefully win a civil suit 2 years later. Members of the jury, ask yourselves, what's more likely? That Stevie Rogers is some sort of criminal mastermind who orchestrated this elaborate plan, the plan that Ms. Shapiro keeps telling you about, or that Drew Mars heard a conversation and got desperate. And that desperation led her to some drugs. And then after, members of the jury, to cover up what she had done, she turned to deceit. Find the defendant liable. Thank you.
All right, thanks, counsel.
All right.
All right, Margarita.
Yep, if you can hold on 1 second, I'm going to have them go ahead and turn off our live stream.
Okay. I got a vote. Score, rather. Didn't do the last part.
1 second. And I'm going to open the breakout rooms for the students.